So that's how I would describe it. Well, welcome everybody who is on the board. I welcome you at the 10th edition of Šperkstret 2020. My name is Dana Tomečkova. I'm based in Bratislava. I'm a jeweler, an artist. I'm also a graduate from the Academy of Fine Arts and Design here, from the studio SML XL, Metal and Jewellery, held by Professor Karol Weislechner. So I'm quite local, but in this context of Zoom meeting, it doesn't really mean anything. I will be here to moderate the talks and open the discussion for your questions at the end of every lecture. And I can say that I'm really happy that there are so many of you joining us from different parts of the world. It feels very special and even something like an advantage of this not only happy times that we are experiencing. So at least this is like a bonus to, or like a cherry on the cake. That's one good point about it. Let me briefly introduce the format of Šperkstret for those who don't know and who are here for the first time. This is the 10th edition, and it's biennial, so it means it's happening every 2 years. It's an active platform for contemporary jewelry discussions and interdisciplinary dialogue with other arts and general public. And every time it has a specific topic, and different artists, galleries, curators, theorists, collectors are invited to give a lecture. And by this, they somehow comment on this specific topic. This year, the topic is entitled Body, Politics, and Jewelry. What it might mean. Each of the lecturers, they somehow have their own perspective on the topic, and they bring their point of view, which I feel is creating very interesting kind of web. So it's great that if you have a possibility to join the all lectures, and they can, like, what the web is consisting of. It can be the social value of jewelry, or the socio-political statement of jewelry, the relationship between technology and the human body, the practice of collective and political body, or as today, it can be about the power of objects and about certain forces that we are coping with and that we are also part of, that we are interwoven into some systems, into social system. And at this point, what I feel important, it's not about jewelry exclusively or anymore. It's like much broader than that. And it's about the awareness of what we are put in and in what context we are creating and using jewelry, exposing it and communicating with it. So I hope these lectures will offer you this diverse picture and something you can take for yourself and consider. And before I introduce Pravu Mazumdar, who is here with me, I would just switch to some practicalities for you. This lecture will last for about 30 minutes. After that, you are welcome to join the discussion. For that, you have a chat box below, on the panel below, like somewhere here. So just feel free to ask whenever. Your question will stay there. It can be asked in Slovak or in English, not more languages. And and what. If you have any technical problem, like you don't hear us, don't see us, also use the chat box for it. And at the end of Pravu's lecture, we will start a discussion that will last for about 20 to 30 minutes, according to what the time is and where we are at, also on the energetical level. So let me introduce Pravu Mazumdar. Hello.
Hello.
You will be talking about how to do things with jewelry on the power of objects. I would just briefly say that in the process we call jewelry, bodies and objects intermingle as constellations of forces involved in the jewelry process. And your talk will focus on the connection between jewelry and power. And I will not tell more. And I will just introduce you as a person, as a professional. Pravu Mazumdar is an Indian freelance author, philosopher, writer, translator, and lecturer. He studied physics in New Delhi and Germany and obtained a doctorate in philosophy at the University of Stuttgart, and currently works mainly in Germany. His interest revolves around art and philosophy and their interpretation. He focuses mainly on French postmodernism and philosophy of Michel Foucault. He is devoted to the philosophy of contemporary jewelry, writes about its experimental forms, or about its social overlaps, migration, and consumerism. His book, Gold and the Mind, Prolegomena towards the philosophy of jewelry, focuses on jewelry and discusses above mentioned topics. That was it from me, and now I'm giving the mic to Pravu Mazumdar.
Thank you. Thank you, Dana, for the introduction, for the friendly words. Thank you also for this opportunity to share a few thoughts here. It's a very welcome opportunity because it's an interruption in the solitude of writing. You're just alone with your writing table, and it's lovely to come out of that solitude from time to time and ventilate one's ideas and exchange and discuss. Basically, I'd like to present an idea today, which is part of an ongoing research and still somewhat fresh and faltering. I'd like to apply a linguistic idea to the world of objects. On the left of the screen, you can see the cover of a book, which is probably one of the most famous in the context of 20th century philosophy of language. John Austin, How to Do Things with Words. Austin discovered that certain fragments of speech are not only associated with a meaning, a grammatical form, a material of sounds and written characters, but also with a strange semiotic force that is capable of generating effects. I'll give you an example. When the chair of a meeting declares, "This meeting is concluded or convened," the meeting is actually made to end there through the sheer act of uttering these few words. "This meeting is concluded" is not a statement of fact. It's a speech act. In the following, I'd like to unfold an idea which is analogous to speech acts, the idea of thing acts, implying that similar to speech, an object can be regarded not only as a form, a content, a material, but also as a force capable of generating effects. My discussion will be divided into 8 parts. The first two sections will be a theoretical introduction to the problem with a short digression into 20th century thought. In the other 6 sections, I'll try to flesh out the idea of thing acts by describing concrete objects from the world of contemporary jewelry. A few introductory words. Jewelry makes its appearance on the body, and the body makes its appearance through jewelry. This interplay between jewelry and the body constitutes an ancient anthropological technique of coming into appearance in an environment that is populated by gazes. In the course of such a process, which I would like to term a phenomenotechnique of the self, which means a technique of letting the self come into appearance. It's a phenomenotechnique of the self. So in the course of such a process of a phenomenotechnique of the self, the first thing that meets the eye is the surface of the body, consisting of elements like the figure or movement of a person, or the skin, the voice, speech, gestures, facial expressions, or dress and hairstyle, or things like tattoo and jewelry, each contributing specifically to the manner in which the person comes into appearance and can be perceived. Jewelry is in effect part and parcel of a daily politics of appearance. And yet, jewelry is also an object in its own terms, not only in the sense of a passive entity exposed to the forces that populate its environment and perceive or assess or circulate or consume or discard it as an object. In addition, the object itself, the jewelry object itself, is a force that can shape behavior. For the life of a work unfolds as an act of intervention within the power structure of the forces in its environment. The work is never merely a surface for projections. It's also a fountainhead of sociocultural energy. Moreover, the power of jewelry, of a jewelry object, is inseparable from the power of the body, as we know, the body of the wearer. Because the object in concern is literally grafted onto the living body of the wearer and cannot but participate in the daily interactions in which the body is enmeshed. In its everyday life, jewelry makes its appearance on the mobile surfaces of living bodies, blazing a trail of impacts along the trajectories connected with the personal or professional schedules of the wearer. In the following, I'll try to illustrate this basic point with the help of a few jewelry works that were created in the last 4 decades. My criterion for selecting these pieces for discussion is certainly not the prominence of the piece or its maker. My only criterion is what I would like to call the performative surface of the piece. In other words, I'll discuss these pieces not in order to show what they are by clarifying the form or composition. I'd like to discuss them in order to understand what they actually do. Not what they are, but what they do. I'll try to measure their impact and we'll try to identify the elements that constitute them as acts of intervention. With that, I come to the second section, a world of forces. However, before discussing the concrete objects, I'd like to switch in a short digression into 20th century philosophy, starting out from the idea that objects can function like words as signifiers capable of impacting the sociocultural environment. One can only explain how an object unfolds power if one assumes that it's not only a form, but also a signifier and a force. Through the function as a signifier, the object exercises a force which I would say is not merely a physical force, but a cultural force, a social force. It impacts the behavior of the persons interacting with the object. At the end of his famous essay on the work of art in the age of its technical reproducibility, Walter Benjamin observes that fascism, as expressed in Marinetti's Futurist Manifesto, tends towards an aestheticization of politics. So transformation of politics into an aesthetic undertaking. In contrast, the communist response, which is Benjamin's response to the fascist challenge, has to effect a politicization of the existing bourgeois form or order, which is ultimately the legal order based on the institution of ownership. Fascism, according to Benjamin, tries to control the rising masses without transforming ownership structures. It does so by pressing the power of the masses into an aesthetics of order, which ultimately turns out to be an aesthetics of military order. Because Marinetti's Manifesto of Futurism is also an eloge, is also a glorification of war. So the military aspect is a part and parcel of it. In abstract terms, this appears, the fascist strategy appears as a strategy that pacifies a force by locking it up within a form. The fascist strategy of masking a force with a form is realized through a cult of the form, in which the form is re-auratized, to use a Benjaminian term, given an aura, giving, how would I say, giving the semblance of speciality, of originality, of an interruption, and so on, and becomes an end in itself. So the form is re-auratized and becomes an end in itself. Benjamin would rather pursue the opposite strategy of retrieving the force locked within a form as an action inherent to the form. A few years later, this motif reappears in an entirely different and unexpected sphere of thought. In the mid-50s of the 20th century, John Austin, whom I just mentioned at the beginning, delivered a series of lectures under the title, How to Do Things with Words, in which he showed that there are grammatical forms which are not simply utterances that state something, and in doing so describe the world, but utterances that perform something, and in doing so transform the world. These performative utterances can only function as actions when they are uttered under certain circumstances. One of Austin's examples is the utterance, I name this ship Queen Elizabeth, rendered under the circumstance of smashing a bottle of champagne against the stem of the ship. The statement, encased within its grammatical form, causes the transformation that the ship is henceforth called Queen Elizabeth. The idea of an action encased within a form, but constantly and subtly at work, erupts once more a few years later in Michel Foucault's vision of power. The immediate target of Foucault's critique are the traditional dichotomies of Western thought, which cuts up the world into the spheres of the body and the mind. Or in a different version, the spheres of nature and society. But underlying these rigid and opposing forms are myriads of forces, understood as tendencies and micro units of behavior hitting upon each other, irrespective of their origin in nature or society, the body or the mind. The moment these forces underlying the traditional forms become visible, the world appears in a new light. We have a multitude of forces, which, however, are not merely a chaos of tendencies. In reality, they tend to be spontaneously aligned to yield what Foucault terms the dispositives of power. These dispositives involve forces inherent to the immateriality of discourses as well as the materiality of things such as buildings, bodies, institutions, etc., and why not also objects of art. They enable a new kind of analysis of the complex relationships between things and humans. In this sense, jewelry can be regarded as a dispositive involving an entire network of relations, not only between jewelry objects and wearers' bodies or an observer's gaze, but also the myriads of other forces like galleries, markets, institutions, discourses, habits, tastes, aesthetic norms, etc. A jewelry object is a force in a network of forces that can align to create perceivable tendencies permeating entire societies. So this is, so to say, a few strands of the thought of the 20th century applied to a very special area, to a very narrow area of jewelry objects. I will now turn to a series of specific objects and try to flesh out these ideas, as I promised. Section 3, the red dot. In 1980, Otto Künstli was invited by a well-known gallery in Basel to exhibit his works. During his preparations, the galleries reminded him sternly that this was a gallery specialized in serious art, and that the artist, which means Otto Künstli, would do well to keep that in view. In response, Künstli proposed that the gallery be left empty and that he would instead mark each visitor with a red dot. One can easily recognize the power game unfolding in this little everyday conversation between a gallerist and an artist. The gallery considers its specialization as a filter that ultimately decides whether a work of art can be permitted to cross the threshold of visibility and obviously saleability. In accordance with such a self-understanding, the gallery tries to clamp down a norm on the artist. The artist, in turn, responds with imagination and chutzpah. He builds on a time-tested convention like the red dot, functioning as a badge of power, as Künstli puts it, a badge of the power of possession that marks an object as unsaleable because it has already been sold before the process of display is completed. Künstli's red dot is a brooch made of a drawing pin with a red head, meant to unite the functions of jewelry and marking, and capable of being fastened anywhere on a visitor's clothing. Attaching it on the body of a visitor would visually invert the logic of the power that enables the ritual of buying and selling art through the use of categories like producer, customer, commodity, and brand. The red dot has the potential and power to transform the empty gallery space into a machine for inversions. The visitor walks in as a customer and walks out as a commodity, at least visually, by wearing the red dot. The visitor walks in to buy a work of art from an artist, but gets bought in the process by the artist himself, at least visually. The work itself undergoes a series of transformations. As soon as it finds its place within the space of the gallery, it turns into a commodity. As soon as it becomes a commodity, it can be sold or worn. As soon as it is sold and worn, it turns into a brand. As soon as it becomes a brand, it functions to brand the customer as a commodity by raising his or her value to the statement, look, here is somebody wearing a genuine Künstli. Moreover, every other place outside the gallery that visitors sporting the red dot happen to frequent would be transformed into an extension of the exhibition venue, because the duration and place of such a mark would also indicate the duration and the venue of an exhibition. Conventional jewelry normally enables an act of self-enhancement and amounts to a culturally predetermined act of self-transcendence. The red dot of the art market also induces something like enhancement. It certifies that the work as a commodity possesses economic transcendence through having already been bought and being no longer for sale. In uniting the two functions of jewelry and a mark referring to a commodity which has already been sold. So in uniting these two functions, Künstli's red dot is at once jewelry, marking, and brand. As a brooch, it modifies the wearer's appearance, just as any other piece of jewelry does. As a marking, it embodies the message that the person adorned with jewelry is actually the work of art and can therefore be exhibited not only in the gallery room, but also outside it as a work that has already been purchased. Finally, it functions as Künstli's, I quote him, burnt-in brand, and his ironical seal of quality as a jewelry auteur. By adorning oneself with it, one acknowledges with pride that one has been sold by the mere act of buying, and that one has crossed an economic threshold to attain a value beyond access. Of course, the gallerist was intelligent enough to refuse such a proposal, realizing that it would amount to subverting the most elementary visual code of market power. But Künstli remained undaunted. In the coming years, he created many editions of his dots, first in red and then in other colors. This is Künstli. This is what is embodied in his red dot, the way he's sitting there, wearing a red dot. So at first he marked the buyers. From 1992 onwards, he began to mark the facades of non-commercial galleries and large public museums in cities like Munich, Oslo, Glasgow, Tokyo, Lisbon. In using the red dot alternately as jewelry for the human body and as an ornament for architectural facades, Künstli not only revoked the genre difference between the two, but also revealed visually the two main types of complicity with the market, occurring on the individual and the institutional plane. In both cases, the red dot revealed how people and institutions simply love the status of already having been purchased. With that, I come to section 4, representing the political. If I were to imagine a single work that might represent a kind of big bang that triggered off the universe of contemporary jewelry, manifested as a dispersal of powerful objects for the human body all across the globe, I would be tempted to point towards Otto Künstli's red dot. Like the proverbial egg of Columbus, the red dot shows how a simple concept concerning the emplacement of an object can unleash a chain of powerful transformations. But the power of an object can also be activated on other levels. The most obvious is that of the message emanating from an object. Madeleine Albright, who was mentioned yesterday in Karen's lecture, employed the power of jewelry in this sense as a kind of non-verbal instrument of communication, functioning as what she calls an icebreaker in a diplomatic exchanges, as in the case of her gold-plated dove brooch, which she received from the widow of Itzhak Rabin shortly after his murder and wore at subsequent peace talks between Israelis and Palestinians. Or the brooch with the three monkeys who would not see hear or speak evil, which she wore at a meeting with Vladimir Putin in view of the fact that it was not possible to mention his war in Chechnya. Putin was not amused when he asked what the brooch meant and received her answer without any diplomatic sugarcoating. However, the power of an object can increase if the political message becomes ambiguous, and the force of the image derives from a transgression of visual codes. One example is Lisa Walker's great flat brooch, especially relevant again today in view of what's been happening in the last few weeks. In the great flat brooch, in which a newspaper photograph is inserted in silver fabric and lacquer, or to put it again, this brooch is a newspaper photograph inserted in silver fabric and lacquer. From close quarters, one sees in the picture a large array of Muslims in prayer, kneeling and touching the floor with their foreheads. And from a distance, the individual figures blend into an abstract configuration of diagonal lines. The brooch can be criticized from both sides of the aisle. It can provoke liberals and Muslims due to its irreverent depiction of people in prayer as a mindless elements of a repetitive pattern. But it can also draw fire from Islamophobes, since it articulates an exaggerated reverence towards what they would term a religion of violence, flaunting on the body of a wearer an image of bloodthirsty terrorists in prayer. So the sheer form and content of the image, the brooch becomes performative, impacting the behavior of its viewers and making them talk, regardless of which side of the conflict they find themselves in. But pure chance, the piece could be seen in an exhibition near Nice at the time of the first attacks in summer 2016, so that it attained a meaning that had never been intended by the artist and drew the expected responses from the viewer. And I'm sure today the brooch would again have another meaning, not originally intended. With that, I come to section 5, the passport project. Johanna Zellmer has unfolded a complex politics of jewelry in which the passport is analyzed, or I would rather say deconstructed, which is something which we'll understand in the course of my description of this project, in which the passport is deconstructed as an instrument of the modern state for amassing abstract personal data gleaned from the concrete biographies of its citizens. The project involves national symbols like the eagle that are sought out from coins related to national economies and transformed into ornaments that are suspended from the ears by means of the plastic tubing used in hearing aids. The metal symbols are perforated with the passport numbers of the participants, who are to be seen in a series of photographs only as a left ear and a neck in profile. In bright daylight, the perforation creates a projection of the passport number onto the neck. Thus, the passport number symbolizing all the information gleaned from individuals and channeled into the archives of governmental power is returned symbolically to the surface of the individual body, while the passport itself is emptied of its conventional data and filled instead with transcriptions of participant interviews with a concrete autobiographical narratives. The national symbol on the passport has been removed, leaving behind a hole. The hole is inlaid with the rims of the coins, which I showed you earlier, which have in their turn been emptied of their symbolic content to yield the ear ornaments. So the whole is a point, one could say, of intersection of the passport and the ornament and the jewelry object for the year. It's a point, it's a kind of interface, it's a point where both merge and appear as a kind of complex installation, I would say. With that, I come to section 6, the title, the level of the material. The power of an object can also issue from its material. If it's charged with a powerful and problematic meaning, if the material is charged with a powerful and problematic meaning that precedes its use in creating the piece. A remarkable example of the refashioning of a material with problematic connotations is Stephen Malquin's work, which articulates his passionate pacifism by connecting bullets that kill with poppies that commemorate the dead. Stephen is a friend of mine who passed away a few years ago. This lecture is dedicated to him. In the 100 years since the Battle of Gallipoli, the poppy has become a token of mourning in Europe, the United States, Australia, and New Zealand. As Malquin, who was a sculptor and jewelry artist steeped in the historical knowledge of materials, as he visited battlefield cemeteries in Belgium, as he moved through the ranks of white Portland stone headstones, his eyes occasionally caught sight of a small red poppy on a wreath that lay to the side of the headstones. On returning to his hometown in Dunedin in New Zealand, he started refashioning brass cartridge shells into poppy brooches. Fusing together the handcrafted debris of war with symbols of remembrance and creating in his work a space in which, put in his own words, terror meets beauty. So within the space of his work, terror meets beauty and creates the possibility of effects and forces of affecting the observer who has been made aware of the material background of the pieces. With that, I come to section 7, my second last section, jewelry and action. A precise example of an action encased within a form is Peter Bauhuis's lint pin, which plays with the conditioned behavior of viewers expressed in the reflex reactions. When attached to a pullover, the pin looks like a stray piece of fluff and causes the viewer to try to brush it off. The resemblance between the form of the pin and the fluff that we are taught to get rid of gains control of the viewers and impacts their behavior, thus illustrating the power that can be exercised by an object. It literally moves a physical body, which is conditioned socially. In his more recent work, Bauhuis elaborated the element of resemblance. Here, it's actually the factor which causes the performance of the object is resemblance, the resemblance between a pin and a piece of fluff. So this element of resemblance, he elaborated these elements into a labyrinthine system of deceptions in which he invented an ancient culture that created jewelry from gallium, an element that begins to melt at body temperature. The pieces created by Bauhuis, but attributed to a fictitious gallium culture, were displayed within a space belonging to the Munich Archaeological Collection. Since the exhibition had all the trappings of an archaeological exhibition, which means the pieces were framed, so to say, were placed on a stage which was a fiction. Since the exhibition had the trappings of an archaeological exhibition, people were quite at a loss what to believe. The emplacement of the pieces within the physical space of a venerated museum and the discursive space of archaeology as a discipline unfolded the impact on the behavior of the visitors who were confronted with the question concerning the function of jewelry that could either be worn, nor that could neither be worn, nor had been found to play a role in burial rites, as Bauhuis's curatorial remarks suggested. So Bauhuis presented himself as a curator of these pieces, and he simply said that his own work has a strange affinity to these pieces which were unearthed by archaeology. And that was a reason for curating this strange exhibition. In a later work, Bauhuis turned the movement of resemblance upon itself and started imitating his own work in a series of rings and bracelets called Replica, in which he emulated the elementary forms of the gallium culture to create a new series of wearables, because the gallium pieces are not wearable. A new series of wearables cast in bronze and fire gilded by an ancient Greco-Roman technique. What results is an honest imitation of a fake. The gallium association is retained, but the evocation of an ancient culture is diminished through the acknowledgement that the original fake has been imitated. So these pieces are not faked originals, but they're copied originals. And that is stated by Peter Bauhuis. So Peter Bauhuis is the artist copying originals which he professes are not from his studio, but which he has in fact himself created. So he's copying works. So it's a kind of technique of creativity. He first sort of designs a fictitious culture in which a different type of jewelry might be possible, and then derives strength and inspiration from this culture to copy these pieces and place them in our world, so to say. So it's a kind of creative function of the which unfolds through this opposition between a fictional space and our real space, so to say. With this, I come to section 8, my last section, the gaze of a ring. One of the most radical ways of exercising power is through the medium of a gaze. Can an object have a gaze? The young history of contemporary jewelry is replete with attempts at representing the gaze or the subjectivity of an object by incorporating eyes or fingerprints or sculptural simulations of slugs, beetles, berries, fingers, hands, masks, etc., or inserting photographs, narratives, etc., into wearable pieces to dramatize the presence of jewelry on the body of a wearer. In other words, to give, to attach to the object a representation of subjectivity, which is the gaze. But is it possible to incorporate a real gaze, a gaze into an object? Is it possible to imagine that an object can see and that it has a standpoint, it has a point of view? In one of his many jewelry experiments, Gisbert Stach from Munich mounted a miniature film camera on the face of a ring, which he then wore as he went about his daily chores. The result is a strange film consisting of 9 sequences in which familiar activities like brushing one's teeth, shopping, taking the subway, blowing one's nose, driving a car can be experienced from the standpoint of a ring. Before I conclude, I'd like to present one of these sequences. The wearer is taking the subway. So in all these sequences, not only this one, a ring as a material object and artifact evokes the hand that made it or can wear it. The gaze of the ring, however, reveals not only the world from the height of the hand, but also the life of the hand itself. Not only the conscious and functionally reduced life of the hand of a maker, but also the life of the hand in full bloom, the unconscious life of the hand which is not being moved with purpose, but which is just being let just to be as it is. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks a lot, Raul, for this lecture. I feel like I kind of need some seconds to land. Maybe you can also take your few seconds for landing and coming back to where we've been. Yeah, it was very dense, very rich in information, but also about constructing your point. If you don't mind, I will check what we have in chat.
Yes, please.
I can. Yeah, Francesca Guarnieri, thanks for the very intense lecture. Maja Nepczynska, thank you, Pravo. It was impressive lecture. So I think while we are settling down, I would maybe start with my first question that would be more general, and maybe even we've talked about it, but I would ask once more, what accounts as political for you?
You mean I have not defined what I mean by the political. I've only talked about power. The political is inseparable from power, obviously. But I would, just like Karen did yesterday, I would really distinguish between the politics of the politicians, which is the tip of an iceberg, and which, as I would say, the politics of the politicians comes always too late. Things are already on the level of society, on the level of these micro forces and micro behaviors, the atmosphere. So today we are experiencing Donald Trump from two sides of the aisle, and people are surprised. But if we would have all paid attention to what was going on in the American society for decades, then we would not actually be surprised. Donald Trump is an example of the politics of politicians, which comes too late. To prevent such a politics, if you wanted to transform such a politics, we would have had to intervene on a lower level, on the undergrowth of micro forces, like the forces which I showed in connection with Foucault's conception of power. So objects belong to this much more fundamental and much more, I would say, powerful plane on which power processes can be studied and can be created, can be sort of played with, like Otto Künstli playing with a simple red dot, but creating an unbelievable chaos in the market code, so to say. Yeah.
As far as I also got it from your words, is it like political power of jewelry, or political can come before the politics?
Yes.
Like advance.
Yes.
Power itself.
It has a more general scope, the term, the adjective political. And in a sense, in this sense, one could, I mean, it loses meaning when you generalize too much, but one has to say, basically, all art objects are inherently political. If we are not staring at the meaning or content or material, but if we are also allowing ourselves to perceive their relation, first with the walls of the exhibition space, the vitrines, with the lighting, with the guards, with the bodies of the people visiting the gallery. Then obviously when the pieces sort of swarm out of the exhibition, having either been sold or being tried on or being gifted to or something, when they're swarming out into the social space, then they're no longer controllable. And they're each of them exercising their own politics of appearance, because appearing itself is politics. Recently, I took part in a demonstration. It was connected with a very tiny problem, the issue of language teachers who are not being paid financial compensation for not being able to do their work due to the corona lockdown. So a very small group of unimportant people, so to say. And practically nobody was an audience of the demonstration. But the very fact that these people came together and created a form and had their signs and paroles and so on, that very fact made them come to appearance for themselves. They realized that they were a social entity, a political entity, even though nobody took note of that. So the politics coming into becoming visible is itself a political act. That's how I would put it. And that's what I call the phenomenotechnique of the self, coming into appearance. Mm-hmm. And everything else, aesthetics, ornamentation, decoration, all that follows later.
Coming into appearance and be recognized.
Yes. And that's not only jewelry. I mean, it's a huge assortment of techniques which we possess. A smile itself, creating, behaving crazily. Basically, if one purposely behaves crazily, then one must say one is an excellent sociologist, because one has understood and studied the norms and understands carefully what a deviation from the norm can be and practices it. Another politics of appearance.
Thank you. This, may I go to the following question?
Yes, please.
Timotej Blažek, he's saying, I will translate, or I will try to do my best to translate accurately. Thank you for the great lecture. It's interesting to see the context of things, like the matter or the thing that is public, like the picture from the newspaper in the work of Lisa Walker, that it's becoming something as a private jewelry, something that is owned by a person, and at the same time, again, something public.
Yes.
That you wear is it is as the same photography in this transformation and in the context of body has become or reached more intensive emotional and interpretive meaning.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for this insight. The public and the private uniting in this one piece, which is in itself a powerful political act.
That's also maybe relating to something that I had on my mind when we previously discussed what you would talk about, this gender theory is really based on like the connection, or there's a clear node of connection of private and political, that political is private or personal, to put it that way. I don't know if you want to comment on that, or if we can
No,
continue.
because I mean, I would definitely subscribe to the gender theoretical work of Judith Butler, which is also very much based on Foucault's theory of power, which is again, which doesn't reify gender as a metaphysical essence, but which sort of sees gender as an effect of a performative, as an effect of a practice. You do things in order to be perceived as a man or a woman. You do certain things, and these minute, subtle, often subconscious practices, which ultimately reveal a macro effect, which is a man, a woman, a transgender, whatever it be. So it's definitely, it comes from the same, as my little reflections, they come from the same world, so to say, the same paradigm or the same perspective on what it means to be. To be is to do. You could sum it up.
I think we'll get to that also further in the discussion about
Yes.
this performativity, as you also mentioned in your lecture. Johanna Zelmer comments, thanks a million, Pravu. So if jewelry plays a role in the politics of daily appearance and is inseparable from the body, specifically in order to act as a signifier, where does this leave unwearable objects, such as Peter Bauhuis' gallium hoard and my own jewelry aids?
Yes. And that is where I would definitely bring in the concept of the dispositive. It's not about isolated objects. It's about objects, bodies, as forces in an entire network of forces. And I would say an artist who is creating not a wearable piece of jewelry, but something unwearable, or an installation of something, is simply, but to really explicate my thesis, I would need much more time. So I'll just place it in the air, so to say. Such a work like that of Johanna Zellmer with her Passport project, or Peter Bauhuis with the Gallium project, is nothing but working to transform a dispositive. It's a work on the dispositive of jewelry, not jewelry as an object which is worn and which can be sold to be worn. But it has a much bigger, how would I say, in German you say Anspruch. It has a much bigger purpose behind it. It's not just to, it is also, I would say such works, I would consider them as epistemic projects of knowledge, of increasing a social knowledge of the power of objects, of what jewelry is, what it means to adorn oneself. After all, the question is not just, how would I say, a chance question. If one considers that jewelry is one of the earliest practices which can be associated with being human at all. It goes back into the fog of prehistory, so to say. So it's a legitimate question. What does it mean that these animals we call human, that these human animals adorn themselves, and not like a peacock spreading his feather, but create pieces, but take lumps and chunks of matter from the earth, so to say, and fix it to themselves. I mean, philosophy is the art of being astonished. And this is absolutely astonishing. Why do we do that? So such questions, I find, are always surface in such projects as Peter Bauhuis sort of presents the thought experiment of a jewelry which can be worn because it melts at body temperature. What does it mean? What happens to the jewelry dimension of it? I would say the very fact that a brooch starts melting at a certain point is a tremendous exercise of power. It shocks the people out of their wits. Uh, if you spend a few hours within a party space, let's say, and then you come in with this brilliant piece of jewelry, and in the course of the party, it begins to melt. At the end of the party, is no longer there on your body.
Yeah,
Just imagine the power that it would exercise. Thank you. I hope that's an answer.
Yeah, thank you. Annelen Svilen, thank you, Pravu, for this interesting lecture. What are your thoughts of the interaction between jewelry and appearance, self-presentation in this post-digital age visual culture? Thank you, Annelen.
So there's a term called Guy Debord, French thinker and artist, who used the term the society of the spectacle, which means that we're living in a society in which we tend to reduce many things into pure appearance. The politics of appearance has sort of swallowed up other aspects. It's not everything, or other aspects of life, like touching, coming into contact through touch, through smell, and things like that. Jewelry is just one part of a comprehensive politics of appearance or practice of appearance. I've discussed that elsewhere in my writings. As I said, a smile is a part of that. The baby starts actually in the very first few days. The process of cultivating and architecting, crafting a very personal politics of appearance comes to be with the sounds, with the first smile on the baby's face, with the screams when it's hungry, and so on. Yeah, all these are modes of coming into appearance. And the moment the baby comes into appearance, begins to appear, the environment responds and reacts. And the entire sociological and social mechanisms sort of start into function. So in today's time, the society of the spectacle, which is a thesis proposed in the 60s, has taken its extreme forms to the possibilities of the cyber culture and the digital age and the selfie culture and so on, yeah, where it seems at some points of our daily lives as if appearance were everything. It's not. Latest, you can understand through being confronted with disease, which spreads like wildfire and which is asymptomatic. It does not appear, but it has its effect. It can have its effect. And the appearance come at a very, very late stage, but we are we're feeling its presence everywhere, but we're seeing nothing.
Can I go on?
Yes, please, please.
Yeah, I also needed time to have it settled. Otto Kunzli saying, "Dear Pravu, a smile, a hug, and a kiss from Otto."
So these three things, a smile, a hug, and a kiss, only the smile is visual. And a hug and a kiss is wonderful. Thank you, Otto.
Sandra Chatterjee, thank you so much for the amazing lecture. Adding to the question on politics and the forces, how might I be able to connect back the forces, especially in terms of the three different theoretical discussions introduced in the beginning, to the specific examples of exemplary, maybe one of them? I'm thinking of Albright or the gaze of the ring. I'm also reminded of Indian aesthetic, for lack of a better word, theory and aharya abhinaya.
Okay, dear Sandra, I'm sorry. I'm totally at a loss because I have so little idea of the aesthetics you're talking about. It needs a special study and understanding. But basically, if you are asking me the question, what is the connection between the world of forces I was talking about and dance? Then that's pretty obvious that I would see no difference between basically, probably dance is an art form in which the action, dance and theater, I would say, the action aspect of the forces of the force or the action locked within a form is most tangible. It's absolutely, you don't have to sort of perceive the action through its effects, but you literally see the action itself. Yeah? In the case of the red dot, you see the effects and then you sort of refer back to what the piece has been doing. But when there's a dance performance, which I, in my understanding of dance, it's basically a practical reflection on movement, on what we are doing every moment of our lived lives. Even in sleep, we're in motion. We're constantly in motion. As long as we're breathing, we're in motion. But a research on the possibilities of movement, you know, which is naturally a very powerful area of artistic inquiry. That is all that I could say, or the way I could respond to your question at the moment. I hope that's a starter at least.
I'm just thinking about the metaphorical dance, that like a social dance.
Yes.
Maybe...
let me tell you a story. This is a very interesting thing. A great sociological Marcel Mauss, who wrote this famous piece called La Donnée, which means on gift, an ethnological piece, but which is of far-reaching consequences for philosophical thing, and has been of far-reaching consequences. Marcel Mauss was lying in a New York hospital, sick. He observed the movement, a certain movement of the nurses, and felt very irritated because the movements reminded him of something which he could not quite pin down. And then when he became well and came back to Paris, then he saw the same movement on the streets of Paris, Parisian women executing the same movements. And then he suddenly realized that it was the movement of a Hollywood diva. And that this movement had spread like wildfire across the Atlantic, on both sides of the Atlantic. So which means that, and then Mauss, sort of after having described this experience, he conceptualizes a new topic for sociological inquiry. What is the channel through which movement is emulated and spread? So the power of movement does not cease at the moment when we are experiencing it as part of an audience in a hall or wherever. It continues, we sort of internalize it, whatever we are seeing on the stage, and it becomes, if we have drawn it deeply into ourselves, it translates into our own movement. That is the power of...
like a vocabulary, like
yes,
unconscious vocabulary.
Exactly. It increases and enriches our vocabulary of movement through the very act of watching it. It depends on how intensely we absorb it.
Thank you. Irak Motesitsky. Dear Pravu, thank you for your thoughts, really inspiring. What makes me ponder is how jewelry in political context sees its own role during the action of being seen, as the mediator or as the result. Is it a message carrier or a conclusion maker, in your opinion?
So I would also here sort of go back to the concept of the dispositive. And I would say that nothing is in isolation. The jewelry object is connected with the body. The body again is in motion. The movement carries the piece with it, like the electrons in a cloud chamber, which sort of, I can literally see the trajectory of the body, the line it draws through the space of everyday life. And that's the same line drawn by the brooch, which the body is wearing, so to say. And then you have the galleries, then you have the fashion, then you have norms, and you have thought processes. And all this taken together are sort of focused and concentrated also in the moment, in the instant of making a jewelry piece. All that the thinking of the jewelry maker has absorbed, the books the jewelry maker has read, the discussions the jewelry maker has, the experiences, the relations he's undergone, and so on and so forth. All these fragments of a biography sort of, they all find their place in the instant of making, unconsciously, of making a piece. Just like with me, when I write a text, all the texts I've ever read in my life are present in that one text. All the discussions I've had, all the pleasures and disappointments I've had, they're all, if it's an intense text, they're all there. Only I can't distinguish them. So in that sense, the creation of a jewelry piece and the piece itself and the display of the piece and the wearing of the piece, they're all part of one flowing process, I would say. And the process is like, so in order to sort of illustrate the idea of a dispositive, the simplest idea is a stream. When I put my foot into the stream and let it go loose, the foot is moved by the current. Now, I don't need to be moved by it. I don't need to be passive. I can also go against the current. So at every point of a dispositive, there's a possibility of transforming the dispositive. And that's what really I would say the radical kind of form research which jewelry makers undertake. They are attempts at going against the current, so to say. There is a dispositive of traditional jewelry. It has certain norms, certain expectations. Yeah, the jewelry piece has to fulfill certain expectations. And to contemporary jewelry, in thematizing and reflecting on the idea of unwearability itself, that's going against the current. That's a typical attempt at transforming the dispositive. We have sort of, as a part and parcel of our historical heritage, sort of taken over.
Mm-hmm. I feel that you somehow at some point also started or reflected on to what extent the elements of a dispositive are performative, like they are not something fixed or stable.
Yes. I would say one talks about the performative when one has in the mind an entity, a static essence. So we thought it was just a pebble, but look at that, the pebble used as a brooch unfolds an impact which transformed the behavior of the observer. But actually it was a pebble. So when we have this opposition in the back of our mind, then we talk about the performative. That's something which is actually static, a piece of matter, a lump of clay. It can become a source of transformations. Mm-hmm. But when we talk about the dispositive, we're only talking about the forces. Every object is, we know from physics, is a physical force, but the idea of the dispositive sort of extends the idea of force to include the idea of a cultural force. By the word force, I simply mean transformation of movement, behavior, etc., which requires, obviously, the agency of the semiotic. It's not just a thing. It's not a thing which is hitting my head or something. That is physics. But it's a thing which is speaking to me, which means something. So if it's a pebble which my grandmother held in her hands before she died, It's not just any old pebble. It is saying something. It's a sign. It's a signifier for me.
But it affects your body also on a physical level, like it
Yes.
literally hits you.
Yes. If it's a heavy stone and falls on my feet are crushed. Although my grandmother touched it before she died. Or something like that. So it's always there, the physical and the cultural.
Yeah, before I go on, I will just mind the time that it's like 20 past 6.
Okay.
So I just want to ask how do you feel and if we shall continue, as we have some questions to go. Johanna Zelmer.
Maybe
Say?
15 minutes or something like that. I don't know. It depends on how many questions there are.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but you will tell me because I don't want to squeeze you out. Johanna Zelmer, many more smiles and another big hug from New Zealand.
Thank you.
Anna Passos, do you have plans to translate Gold Geist to English? It would be great.
Thank you very much. Golden Geist was a compromise because there's a bigger book called The Unleashed Surface, which is about this politics of appearance. But the book is in my drawer because there's neither money nor a publisher. And translating Golden Geist would require also money, as projects always require. So at the present, there's no plan, simply due to the constraints involved. And Golden Geist is a very unfortunate compromise because the actual book of which Golden Geist is just an introduction. It is the introductory chapter to the actual book. The actual book had about 80 to 100 pictures. And the publisher, after taking 1 full year to decide, suggested that I just take over 2 pictures. So I said, no, stop, no pictures at all, and just publish the introduction, please. So I was pretty mad. So it's a book which is connected with anger on my part because it was not what was intended originally. But thank you. It would be great to translate it, but right now there's no plan.
Katarina Siposova, dear Pravu, thank you for a great lecture. Do you think that contemporary jewelry that turns public into customers can be still perceived politically?
So I think no, it is normally not perceived politically, and that's its strength. So I completely agree with what you said yesterday. That was a great insight I took from your lecture yesterday, that maybe the fact that jewelry is marginalized, maybe that is its real strength. Because you said that because that enables jewelry to observe society from the outside. But I would say even more, I would go one step further and say it enables jewelry to exercise a power which it would not have if people would be talking about it. As I said yesterday, if Berlusconi would not have been such a macho, and machos don't talk about jewelry, is not allowed to talk about jewelry, then he would have talked about it, and he would have defended the colonial past of Italy. And he would have said that how impolite this is or something, or he would have used good words for it. But since he was completely at a loss, he was taken, in Germany, you say he was taken on a cold foot. He was taken by surprise, and he didn't have neither the words, nor the rhetorics, nor the concepts to deal with it. And that's where the strength of jewelry lies. So I would say that, thank God, it is not perceived politically. Main thing, it functions politically, whether people perceive it or not.
Thank you. Adriana Del Duca, thank you very much, Pravu, for this precious intervention. I work on programmed art applied to jewelry. At the base, there is a coding, a mathematical calculation. Can a jewel that uses geometries awaken emotions?
Plato would have said yes, because they're Platonic forms, geometric forms, which are connected with the essence of being. So if that's the case, Plato would have said, certainly, we have feelings when we see a triangle. We have, you have such ideas that the Greek had the idea of a sphere as the most perfect form. So when you are confronted with a sphere, you're confronted with something almost divine, and you have an emotion with relation to that. You have a certain emotion when a thing which you expect to be straight is not straight, which is broken or curved. You don't say, oh, the curve is beautiful. You say, oh, the thing is injured. It has been destroyed or something. It's all basically responding to the form. And of course, I think it's a very subtle work to explore the effects of geometrical forms. I think it's a research in itself, and which is, I have the greatest respect for such a research, I would say, in exploring. I mean, it has to be an enormous collective work to really tap the political potential of something like jewelry, because the difference between jewelry and all other art forms is that it's so intimately enmeshed with the human body and the human soul that it's almost difficult to separate the question, what is jewelry, from the question, what is it to be human? Mm-hmm. So that's where the enormous political power comes. It is on an individual level, on a collective level, the political power of jewelry.
Thank you. Sandra Chattery, thank you so much. Teresa Wernerova-Volna, hello Pravo, thank you for your inspirational lecture. Is there any chance your book Gold und Geist would be available in English? You've answered.
As I said, not yet, there's no plan, but one never knows.